run for this particular House seat?
Paul, I have been on and off involved in politics for 20 years or so. Back in '98, I won a spot on the Washington County Quorum Court, spent two terms there, and then decided to go to law school and start families and start a career.
Mm-hmm.
And then a couple of years ago, actually, while I was in law school, watching how the federal government was expanding, watching then under the Obama administration how it kept expanding and how the states started to follow, I just decided that government is growing at unprecedented rates. We are giving over more and more private tasks to government agencies, and that is just a cost and a path that I just don't think that we can go down as a state or as a nation. So my small government inclinations, my limited government inclinations, and my inclination for government to control spending, which means that they don't tax us as much, led me to jump into this race this year.
That sounds like a great reason. Talk about where you kind of got your libertarian philosophy from. I mean, was it in law school that you realized that more liberty is better?
Well, just some of that, and then just getting out and getting out on my own, starting a family, and opening up a small office of my own, and just living life, kind of led me to that conclusion. It was really in 2006 when I joined the party after watching the federal government decide to bail out so many private corporations with our money. I just decided that both parties appeared to be parties of big government, and that just wasn't what I believed. I was a Republican when I was on the Quorum Court, and that's when I thought that the Republican Party really was a party of small, limited government. And just over time, my eyes opened up, and I decided that they weren't. And I decided to join the Libertarian Party because their principles really are about small, limited government and more freedom for consumers and taxpayers and just people in general.
Why do you think it's, for somebody who, like you said, who thought that those ideals were in the Republican Party, I mean, they put limited government back in the platform. Recently, the Republicans did here in Arkansas. Of course, it did get taken out, which was weird. Why do you think it's so hard for Republicans to actually limit government the way the platform says?
Well, I think once you become a party in power, there is, I guess, an expectation to run government. And I think that once you're in that power and have that authority and that expectation, you want people to see you running government efficiently and properly. And for some reason, the Republicans have convinced themselves that means helping people and spending more money and shifting taxes around to make it look like they're cutting taxes. And I think it's just an influence of power and authority that creeps in, that kind of clouds the way that they really should be looking at what government should and shouldn't do and how to make things better for consumers and taxpayers and people.
We're talking with Casey Copeland. He's a Libertarian candidate for District 80. Tell us about the geographic boundaries of District 80. Whereabouts is that?
Well, it is basically all of western Washington County and down into northwestern Crawford County. The cities that it includes are Prairie Grove, Lincoln, and Cedarville, and then all the small little communities and farms and spots in between and around. The northern boundary is just west of Johnston, and then the southern boundary is just basically south of Uniontown.
And the current occupant of that seat is Republican State Representative Charlene Fight, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
And there's three of us in this race. It's her, myself, and a Democrat by the name of Lou Sharp. So it's a three-way race this year for District 80.
Three-way race. I want to get back to the Libertarian way. You said that or the Republican issue here. You said that Republicans get in there, and then they're expected to run government. So they may promise to take.
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. It's hour number one, and you have found the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. We're building a liberty machine. Thank you so much for being with us. The phone number, 870-275-9799. That's 870-275-9799. Also broadcasting across multiple platforms as usual, but sound off at facebook.com/Conduit News if you want to leave a comment. We appreciate that. Okay, so we got a great show for you. We're going to talk what's happened nationally here in just a second. We also want to talk about another ballot initiative that's going to be on the ballot for Arkansans this November. Now it's the minimum wage. That's right. Increasing the minimum wage is going to be on the ballot yet again. And I will tell you this, if this goes through, it's going to make Arkansas, it's going to have like one of the highest minimum wages in the country if this goes through. Right up there with, I think, California and Washington. Just hang on, because we're going to have a very specific conversation in the Conduit for Commerce policy segment coming up, and it's going to be about why the minimum wage is bad. And I've told you this before, but we've got to revisit it because now the people of Arkansas are going to be voting on this once again. So we'll tell you about that. Then we also want to talk a little bit about term limits today. At the bottom of the next hour, we'll be talking with term limits advocate Tim Jacob. Will be on the program at 7:33. So we had Senator Linda Collins-Smith on the program. We'd love to have her back, and we're going to schedule that. We'd love to. We had her on the program Friday, and she talked about why she was against the proposal, and we're going to have Tim Jacob on 7:33. He's going to talk about why he's for the proposal. And so we've got all that coming your way on the program. Also, yesterday they had the Medicaid subcommittee. There's a little piece written by Andy Davis over at the Gazette this morning kind of summarizing the meeting. And I just have to say, I find it interesting. There's some very interesting discoveries in that piece. We'll get to that in today's program as well. Okay, so let's start with the top here. I had this article sent to me last night. Exclusive. Trump worries that Mueller interview could be a perjury trap. This is from Reuters. U.S. President Donald Trump said on Monday he was worried that any statements under oath that he provides to the special counsel could be used to bring perjury charges against him as part of the probe into Russia's electoral interference. In an interview with Reuters, Trump echoed the concern of his top lawyer in the probe, Rudy Giuliani, who has warned that any sit-down with Mueller could be a perjury trap. Now, if this sounds familiar to you, it's because we interviewed, if you've been listening to the program, we interviewed Chris Ann Hall, constitutional advocate, talk radio host, on the program last week. And one of my last questions, go ahead and go to Conduit News, Joe. One of my last questions in our interview was this question, and this was Chris Ann Hall's response. Take a listen. Donald Trump's lawyers, Jay Sekulow, Rudy Giuliani, they're saying, look, he's the president of the United States. We'll take this all the way to the Supreme Court. He doesn't have to comply with a subpoena. What are your thoughts on the powers of the president in this context, Chris Ann Hall?
Well, what we're talking about here again is the difference between what the Constitution says and what precedent says. Okay, so in studying Article 2 and the power of the president, we learn very clearly that the power of the president is very small on purpose. And the reason the power of the president is small, because they didn't want to establish a king. Many of those who were the founders and the creators of our Constitution were very concerned that by creating an executive branch who had a single person as the head of that executive branch, that over time that person would be able to collect power and become a king. So that's the first principle we need to understand when we're dealing with presidential power. What is the enumerated limited authority of the president, and what is the purpose of that power that is delegated? And so what the president's attorneys are talking about is precedent. There is no limitation in the Constitution for the president of the United States to not be subpoenaed. So will the Supreme Court uphold the precedent that the president can't be subpoenaed? Who knows? But the president is a civil officer, just like every other civil officer in the federal government. And to establish that the president cannot be subpoenaed would be to do exactly opposite of what our founders intended, that he and place him in the realm of being above the law, or maybe even being very kingly. Now, the thing that we need to remember, that as an individual, as a president, even though he may be subpoenaed, he is not required to testify, because remember, the allegations are against him. And so he has the authority to say, you know what, I'm not going to testify because I'm not going to say anything that may or may not inadvertently indict myself. So I have the right to refuse to testify. And for me, if I was his attorney, I would give him that advice, because this subpoena is just ridiculous. Nobody is looking to get information from Donald Trump. They're looking to trap him into perjury because they have absolutely no credible charge against him at this time. So if you look at these hearings that have been happening, we realize that in these hearings, nobody's actually being charged with the purpose of the investigation. They're being charged with things that are simply not even related to the investigation, so that they can say that they have some kind of case and they have some kind of charges pending.
Stop.
So I firmly
All right, so that was Chris Ann Hall last week, and that interview, by the way, is up right now at conduitnews.com. And you can get that small clip there, or you can get the full interview where she talked about the 700-year history of the Constitution, specifically the 5 documents throughout that 700-year period that came before that started to establish this concept of rights and the relationship really from citizen to government. And very, very, very fascinating interview. And of course, Chris Ann Hall's you can go to chrisannhall.com if you want more. And she's got she's a constitutional attorney. She's has Liberty First University. Really, really fun stuff. So in other news, speaking of the president, have you guys been following the liberal media's absolute meltdown when it comes to what he did to John Brennan by taking his security clearance away? Trump calls out security clearance profiteers in John Brennan tweet. It's going to get under their skin even more. Joel Pollack, writing that President Donald Trump tweeted on Monday that those former intelligence officials who had emerged publicly to defend former Central Intelligence Agency Director John Brennan had done so to protect their economic interests. Here's the tweet. I hope John Brennan, the worst CIA director in our country's history, brings a lawsuit. It will then be very easy to get all of his records, texts, emails, and documents to show not only the poor job he did, but how he was involved with the Mueller-rigged witch hunt. He won't sue. Now, that's because Brennan suggested he might sue because of his freedom of speech being violated or something, because apparently having a security clearance is now an unalienable right. Everybody wants to keep their security clearance, the president tweeted. It's worth great prestige and big dollars, even board seats. And that is why certain people are coming forward to protect Brennan. It certainly isn't because of the good job he did. He's a political hack. That's President Donald Trump. Let's go over to what happened on CNN the other day. CNN's Philip Mudd blows up at Paris Denard. Okay, Paris Denard starts talking about how these security clearances are actually ways for people to make a lot of money. And he said this, and if you're not watching the program and you're only listening to it, I feel sorry for you at this moment because you've got to see Philip Mudd's face as Paris Denard starts to talk about how it's profitable to have your security clearance. I mean, he goes full psycho. It's like that. I don't know if you've ever seen, just it's like the Dude Perfect guys. You know how when they do the stereotype videos, they always have Rage Monster. This guy goes Rage Monster. You've just got to watch this. Listen to this from CNN the other day.
A lot of these people that have these security clearances, and this is the secret in the swampy Washington, D.C., they have them and they keep them because it's profitable for them after they leave government. Because if you have a security clearance, especially high-level security clearances, your contracts and your consulting gigs pay you a lot more money because of the access that you have. I hope the president continues to do this, and I hope he adds Omarosa to the list, because if she has a clearance, she too, because of her actions, should have it revoked.
Well, I don't know if I'd put Omarosa in the same category of the 75 people who signed those letters, but Phil Mudd, I imagine you want to react.
Profitable, Paris. When I am requested to sit on an advisory board, let me ask you one question. How much do you think I'm paid to do that at the request of the U.S. government? Give me one answer, and you got 10 seconds. How much?
I'll ask you a question. How much are you paid for your consulting and contracting gigs?
I have no contracts with the U.S. government that pay money.
I'm not talking.
Zero.
And this is the thing. I'm not talking about what the federal government.
Advice to the U.S. government,
Phil,
I get paid zero.
Phil, let's be honest. I'm not talking about your role with the federal government. I'm talking about the contracting gigs that you get from being a consultant and a contractor. The consulting firms that they form and that you all get is because
Can you understand how? What an unhinged reaction this guy really does go into full rage mode, but it's a nerve that I mean, I think this is a reaction, or a tantrum because the cat is being let out of the bag here. It's like, no. And if there's all these other former intelligence agents or former intelligence officers and everything else that have these security clearances that are feeling the same way, and notice how he's either so irrational because of his rage he doesn't understand the point that Denard is making here, or Denard, or he's doing it intentionally to deflect, and I think it's probably he's doing it intentionally to deflect. He's not talking about sitting on an advisory board. He's talking about what you get how you have more clout in the private sector, and you use your security clearance because you're privy to information or potentially privy to information to get high-paying jobs. That's what he's talking about, not continued government payment, okay? And, of course, this guy doesn't even want to hear it. Now, listen to this, because this is really the swamp being revealed on CNN. Keep going. Just real quick, briefly, I want to get one more clip in.
More money when having a consultant, for having the security clearance.
Stop acting like that doesn't happen. I have zero consulting relationships with the U.S. government. Zero.
I'm not talking, Phil, that's a good talking point. I'm not talking about relationships with the government. I'm talking about in the private sector. When you have a security clearance and you keep it. I have zero relationships with the private sector that involve my security clearance. Zero. I get $0 from consulting companies that deal with the U.S. government. Are we clear? Well, I will be clear in saying that everybody in Washington, D.C. knows if you don't want to be honest about it, that's on you. But if you have a security clearance and you keep it, you get more money to have it.
We're done. Get out.
Phil,
it's not your show, so I'm staying right here. Don't be so defensive about this. Don't be so defensive about this. Your voice is still here. You can.
So here's the thing: like everybody, this is why I loved this segment. Everybody in Washington D.C. knows it. You can say that about really politics in general. You know, I've said it before where we talk about corruption and in Little Rock specifically. Everybody in Little Rock knows who's making a little bit on the side, or everybody knows what the legal grift is. But that actually now we're finding out may be illegal. I'm specifically talking about attorneys passing bills for their clients who are legislators. But that's the one part that really got me. Everybody in Washington knows, and the cat's out of the bag. And his reaction is one of, vitriol. We're done. He tries to shut down the interview, which is strange because he's a guest on the program. It doesn't make much sense. Anyway, we're going to take a break here. Sound off. Tell me what you think about this. And we'll be back here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
For the first time, I want to introduce you to Dr. Michael Busler. He is a public policy analyst. He's an economics expert. He's a professor of finance at Stockton University in New Jersey, and he's a featured columnist at Newsmax, LifeZad, and townhall.com. Dr. Busler, welcome to the program. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning to you, Paul. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yes, sir. I'm glad that you could make it. Reason I wanted to have you on is want to pick your brain about what the media is doing. I've noticed a shift in the mainstream media. You've got an economy that's doing pretty good. Trump's starting to get the credit for it, according to the polls, and they're trying to rewrite history. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. The economy is doing very well, and in my view, it's going to continue to do even better into the short term. And
it's a PHP parody.
Hey, man. You got any of that marble rock?
Yeah, I've got the hookup.
Thanks. I need a fix real bad. I'm itching to grow some government.
How much you need?
I'm gonna need a taxpayer's dime bag.
No problem, sir. 1 taxpayer dime of marble rock. Enjoy.
Thanks, man. They don't call it Little Rock for nothing. Am I right?
Did you know your state representative or state senator may be addicted to growing government? The drug is called marble rock, and too much of it will cause marble fever. Watch for the warning signs. Does your legislator suddenly display a lack of humility when faced with basic questions? Does he or she suddenly develop hubris and pride that was not present during the campaign for office? These are signs they might be smoking the terrible drug marble rock. The solution? Detox. Vote for detox. Vote to send them home for their own good. Warning! Some politicians once voted out of office will not go home and stay in Little Rock to get their fix by lobbying, also known as the Burris Syndrome.
PHP parody.
Need your daily news fix? Don't forget to tune in to Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Tomorrow on the program, we got a great lineup for you tomorrow. We'll be talking with Tim Loggins. There's a hearing today in Greenbrier about the gentleman who was charged with possession of a weapon. Of course, this is a potential test case for Act 746 that has decriminalized the possession of a weapon. We'll talk to Tim about the results of that, as well as the governor coming out and saying he's open to red flag laws. More than one politician now seeming to be open to it. But then we're going to be talking also tomorrow with Maria Espinoza, the national director of the Remembrance Project. We had her on a couple weeks back, but did you hear about this story where the man was detained? The liberal left went crazy because there was an illegal immigrant that was detained by ICE while he was driving his pregnant wife to the hospital. And everybody said, can you believe they're separating families? These ICE, eliminate ICE. Well, there's just one problem. The guy was wanted for murder. I mean, I'm telling you, we are obsessed with victims and oppressors, aren't we? I mean, if you or I, just think if an American citizen had done something similar, and you were driving your pregnant wife to the hospital, and you happen to be a criminal wanted for murder, guess what's going to happen, guys? Guess what's going to happen? You're going to jail too. Now, and if that has happened before, just know this. In this day and age, had you been a legal immigrant, you would have gotten positive press from the whole situation. Crazy. We're losing our minds here. Hey, Peter Schweitzer. I'm telling you, Peter Schweitzer, he came out with that book. Remember, it was Clinton Cash? Huge, huge details about really the criminal enterprise of the Clinton Foundation. FBI reinvestigating the Clinton Foundation right now. Peter Schweitzer is the president of the Government Accountability Institute. And he recently had an interview with Sean Hannity last Friday. And he explained how former FBI directors James Comey and Robert Mueller leveraged their government positions for self-enrichment. The very thing that President Trump's been tweeting about recently, tweeted yesterday, about how you use your security clearance to get more money. He joined his colleague, Seamus Bruner, a GAI researcher, to discuss the latter's forthcoming book, Compromised: How Money and Politics Drive FBI Corruption. That's fantastic, isn't it? We have right up here that says Hannity opened with the interview. He opened the interview with questions. How is it all of these politicians have become filthy rich? They're supposed to be public servants. Where does the money come from? What are the conflicts of interest? That's interesting. Apparently, James Comey's net worth has skyrocketed 4,000% by the time he left the Department of Justice in 2005 and came back in 2013. Comey had made $6.1 million. Stop. You know what I'd like to do? I was having this conversation the other day with a friend. Wouldn't it be interesting if we took all people in government, all politicians, and we kind of charted where their income was when they went into public service and where it is? I'd maybe check back in with them in, 2 years or 4 years or after their first term. Like, what kind of house were you living in before you went and became a state representative? What kind of house are you living in now? You know what I'm saying? I mean, at what point did anybody ever actually? We showed you multiple times, but convicted felon Jake Files for stealing your taxpayer dollars. This man lived in a giant mansion. I mean, I've seen mansions, but this mansion was huge, right? And at what point does he move from that, or where was he when he first got into the legislature? Was he in a house that size? I just would like to know. I would like to know. I think it's of public interest. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not anti-making money or anti-being rich, but when you're carving out a financial niche and you're claiming to serve the people at the same time, I just think it would be interesting. We need to start tracking some of these guys. I mean, not just at the federal level, but why not the state level? Why not look at, where your financial situation is now when you go into office, or maybe when you go into higher office, and where is it going to be in a couple of years? I think that would be a very healthy exercise. Now, they would hate it. They would certainly hate it. But I think it'd be a very healthy exercise. That doesn't mean that everybody who does better financially once they get into office is doing something illegal or doing something unethical. That doesn't mean that at all. But if you look at the Jake Files situation, I mean, my goodness. You want to know why he got in trouble? Because he got sloppy. We weren't even talking about just a ton of money. I mean, it's a lot of money to you and me when you look at, what was it? Was it $30,000, something like that? And and he says, take out 15, and then he gives 7, 15 to himself, and 7 to his employees, and he pockets the rest. When you're living that kind of an extravagant lifestyle, and then the wheels start to fall off, 15 grand, 16 grand here and there, it's not a big deal. It's just 16,000. That's what happened. The phone number, 870-275-9799. Feel free, you can call or text Sound Off over at facebook.com/Conduit News.
much long-term future. The reason is President Trump has got economic growth up significantly. And as a result of that, we're coming into this robust economy, and he has done this basically by reversing much of what President Obama did. President Obama is the first and only president in history to serve a term in office without having at least 1 year where annual economic growth was at least 3%. He averaged a little over 2% for his entire time in office. And the reason is simple. His primary goal was not economic growth. His primary goal was to cure perceived social injustices. It's an injustice that everybody doesn't have health care. It's an injustice that CEOs make 300 or 400 times what the average employee makes. It's an injustice there's not enough food stamps to go around. It's an injustice that big business is taking advantage of consumers. So what President Obama did, all of his actions to cure those perceived social injustices ended up slowing economic growth. For instance, one of the first things he did was have the Affordable Care Act passed. That provided health care for another 6% of the population. We had 85% with health insurance before the Affordable Care Act, jumped up to 91%, so it helped about 6% of the population. The problem is it tended to slow economic growth, and the reasons are simple. There were 23 new or raised taxes in the Affordable Care Act. So what that did was reduce consumption, disposable income and consumption for consumers, tended to slow economic growth. The Affordable Care Act also required that employers provide health insurance for all employees or face a $3,000 fine. That added to the cost of labor, again, tended to slow economic growth. President Obama also, with the President Bush passed tax cuts in 2001. They were going to last for 10 years. They expired in 2011. President Obama extended them for everybody except the upper class. The upper class, the highest tax bracket, had their taxes raised by 10%. Well, that reduced the amount of investment capital that the higher income earners could put back into the economy. By reducing the amount of capital, we have a capital-intensive economy. By reducing the amount of capital going in, that tended to slow economic growth. Then President Obama put in
the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
This story, oh man, I forgot about this one. I can't believe this. I didn't preview this one. The reason I didn't preview this one is because I'm almost positive that this headline has changed. I don't think you have. Do you have the Daily Caller article up? You don't have it, do you? Okay, it's fine. I didn't put it in the rotation because the headline changed, but it's still up on my screen. Jason Hopkins with the Daily Caller traveled out to the middle of the bayou where they're trying to get this pipeline that's been approved, and there's all these protesters, okay? And so this headline reads, "We traveled out to the middle of the bayou and we found anti-pipeline protesters living in trees." The reason I had picked this story just to give you just a little is because the headline was different. When I got up this morning, the headline read, "We traveled out to the middle of the bayou and a man wearing a red dress climbed out of a tree." I promise you, the headline was different. And they've got a photo of a man, skin and bones, in a red dress that looks actually pretty new, but he's living in a tree, and they're all protesting the Bayou Bridge Pipeline, a major crude oil pipeline. And anyway, you imagine if you were that reporter, let's go see what the protesters are doing. And you go in, and I mean, the way the headline made it sound, as if you were going into some sort of, I don't know, like Indiana Jones, you're temple hunting or something, and you get to the point where, you meet the Temple of Doom managers. That's what it made it sound like. All right, over at conduitnews.com, this headline: minimum wage increase to $11 an hour will be on November ballot. That's right. You see here, it's an act to increase the minimum wage as approved in Attorney General opinion. We have, I, Mark Martin, Secretary of State, do hereby certify that the petition submitted for the proposed initiated measure, popularly known as an act to increase the Arkansas minimum wage. So it's going to go on the ballot. The people of Arkansas are going to vote whether or not to increase the minimum wage up to $11 an hour by 2021. An initiated act to raise the minimum wage received over 84,000 signatures and has been certified to be placed on the November ballot. They needed just under 68,000. The raise would be incremental. That's what we're doing right now, based on the last time the people voted to raise the minimum wage. The raise would be incremental with a final $11 per hour minimum wage in Arkansas by January 1st, 2021. The current minimum wage in Arkansas is $8.50 per hour, the highest in the region. The highest state minimum wage in the United States is currently $11.50 per hour in Washington. People don't realize. Joe just asked, do people not realize what raising the minimum wage does? No, most people don't. They think it makes them more prosperous, Joe. It's very frustrating because right now we're going to have an issue on the ballot, and there's going to be a lot of people that are going to vote for it, thinking that they can just vote themselves prosperity, thinking that arbitrarily we can go from $8.50 to $11.50 and you're going to get that much more per hour. You have no idea how it all basically eventually, makes prices higher and makes, it doesn't do what you think it's going to do. Go ahead, Joe.
Let's look back. Let's take a trip down memory lane real quick. What have prices for products done over the last, 20 years?
Yeah,
they've just gone up.
Yep.
Minimum wage has gone up consistently over the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a trend? Absolutely. Because if you don't know what raising the minimum wage does, all it does is create more costs for the producer, which means in some way, shape, or form that gets passed off to the consumer, which means that money that you're making, that extra money you're making, isn't actually going to your pocket. It's going straight back to the people who gave it to you to begin with.
Exactly. And rent goes up eventually, food prices go up eventually, and there's also less jobs now. And that's what you don't understand. If you want jobs, you have to be able to the business owner has to be able to pay you. And there's also a productivity issue here as well.
Let's not forget small business too. This hurts small business tremendously.
Yes, it does.
Because if they have problems now, when the minimum wage is $8.50, imagine what's $11.50, and they have to pay $3 more per hour.
Well, look at it this way: like, what if right now you have workers that work at different paces? Okay, so right now it's profitable for you to pay somebody $8.50 an hour. You're making money. But let's say there's another employee right next to him that's right on the cusp. They're not as good. They're not as fast. They're not as skilled. And if you were to just take flipping burgers, Bob over here can flip, and make 50 burgers an hour or whatever, and that's profitable, for $8.50 an hour. But you have, I don't know, Steve over here, he really only does 20 an hour. Well, that's still profitable at $8.50 an hour. You can still pay him, based on what you. But now all of a sudden, you raise that minimum wage to $11.
Steve is no longer profitable.
Steve's no longer profitable for the business, so you got to get rid of him. So in some instances, it'll cost you jobs.
Well, It also costs you jobs because you won't be able to pay for the entire staff, so you have to let people go.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's just it's wrong on so many levels. The fact is, it hurts the entrepreneur. It hurts somebody who is maybe in a lower socioeconomic status right now who wants to learn skills, right? Now, let's just be honest here, because I use burgers for a second. I want to make this point. A lot of this is being done, I feel like, for the fast food industry. I mean, we've seen nationally people say, we are workers and we need a living wage. We demand to have, we want to do more. And the fact is that these menial jobs, like working at a fast food restaurant, I'm sorry, but most everybody can do your job. It's not an acquired skill. It's handing a bag of food out of a window.
They want more money for doing less work.
Exactly. And, a rocket scientist makes a lot of money because not everybody is, has the skills.
It's a skilled job.
And this is another thing that the minimum wage ignores. It is essentially a way to wish ourselves prosperity. If this thing passes on January 1st, 2021, when the minimum wage would go up to $11 an hour in Arkansas, if this ballot initiative passes, there will be no more cars made because of this. There's no more homes built. There's no more economic activity from one day to the next. You are arbitrarily saying we are more prosperous today than we were yesterday because we've raised the minimum wage, and yet there has been no other exchange. It hasn't been a natural progression where we're more prosperous. You're just wishing yourself more money that eventually is not going to be, it's going to be worth the exact same that it used to be.
Yeah. So the market itself has backlashed against this principle of raising the minimum wage just arbitrarily. It's clearly done that. That's the reason the prices of stuff has gone up.
Yeah.
Like, this will just do the same thing again. It's going to rubber band back and bite us in the butt at the end of this whole thing.
I've got a text message here. What about a guy who started at $8 an hour and works hard, got raises, and now makes $11 an hour? And with this simple act of the legislature, everybody now makes the same as he.
That's a good point.
That's another great point. Yeah, and it's not a legislative act; it was an initiated act, but still, yeah, it's a great point. You've rewarded your employees that started at $8.50. Now you're paying them $11.
So what happens to that guy? Does he continue? Do they move him up as well?
No, I mean,
does he stay where he's at?
At some point, well, if money grew on trees, yeah, you'd pay. All right, we'll go ahead and pay you $15 an hour now that everybody's making $11. But that's probably not going to happen in the real world. And instead, your $11 an hour employee is, I don't know, maybe he goes elsewhere. Maybe he's discouraged. Maybe he doesn't work as hard, because incentive is a great motivator sometimes, I don't know. It's the government getting involved here. This is terrible. And listen, if you don't educate your neighbors about the pitfalls of the minimum wage, this is going to pass. This is going to pass. And in order for the General Assembly to override this, if they were to now, I think the governor, Asa Hutchinson, came out and said he supports increasing the minimum wage. Can you believe that? The governor came, I just banged my head. The governor came out and said he supports the minimum wage increase, but he didn't support this effort because it should come from the legislature, which is such a fence-walking thing. No, instead what you should say is, you know what? I don't believe in socialism, so therefore I don't believe in the minimum wage. Now, so here's another angle on this. Joe, you ready for this? Minimum wage, living wage, guaranteed income. That's a progression. We need a minimum wage. Okay, here you go. Minimum wage. Government will get involved and tell an employer what they have to pay and tell an employee the minimum amount they can sell their services for. You can't sell your services for less if you were going to maybe wanted to make $4 an hour so you could learn to be a welder when it's not profitable, for the guy to pay you a normal salary because you don't know how to weld. But now you do know how to weld, and so you can go somewhere else and you can make $50,000 a year, But it starts with a minimum wage. And we hear all these people with, the fast food workers protesting, no, we need a living wage. Well, the living wage will eventually morph into what? a guaranteed income just because you exist. Just because you exist. I mean, you saw this though with the healthcare. This is how healthcare starts, right? With healthcare, well, we just need a little bit of government intervention here, and now if you go to your average millennial, and you tell them, you know what, healthcare's not a right, they think that you're Mussolini because they had, yeah, Mussolini would have given them socialized healthcare. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Joe. But you get my point, right? They think you're just like the embodiment of evil, and it's because they have the narrative has shifted. You know, it's no longer, well, for social welfare programs, or we need safety nets, or we need to make sure. No, now it is, no, healthcare's a right, and everybody is enslaved to everybody else. Everybody in this world is born enslaved to everyone else by law, not by altruism, not by, a moral or an ethic or a compassion for your fellow man. So I want to be charitable to Joe, or I want to be charitable to whoever else. No. We're going to codify it in the law that it's basically with the healthcare, it's because people are terrified of dying. Phone number is 870-275-9799. Minimum wage, progression to a living wage, and then you'll have the demand for guaranteed income. Do you remember FDR's second Bill of Rights? FDR thought that America should have a second Bill of Rights that guaranteed people a home, guaranteed them, obviously, health care, guaranteed them food, guaranteed them vacation, that would guarantee them a certain amount of time for leisure activities, which, that's what Europe tries to do in some countries. Here's your vacation. In Canada, they've got a maternity leave paid for by the taxpayers in Canada for like 6 months. Everything up there is really expensive. Well, it's because, well, they have a ton of social programs. And at some point, if you're dependent on the social programs, it becomes harder to get out. It means people with money are always going to have money. It means there's really no class mobility. In America, we still have a little bit of class mobility left when you can be born into bad socioeconomic conditions and you can make it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Ben Carson is a great example of that. So I want to know what you guys think about the minimum wage. I want to know, do you think this is bad? Certainly $11 an hour, which would bring Arkansas, basically into one of the highest minimum wage states in the nation. The state of Washington right now, Washington is $11.50 an hour. If this passes, Arkansas's minimum wage goes to $11 an hour. It's just a huge, huge shock. And I guess, are we going to have one of these on the ballot every 4 years now? Is that what's going to happen? Well, we've got it to $8.50. Well, let's put another one on the ballot. Let's get it to $15. Why not just increase it to $100 right now? $100 an hour minimum wage in Arkansas. Why not? Would that be a bad idea? Right, yeah, it would. But $11.50 won't destroy businesses, is what these liberals want you to believe. Well, you can afford it. You're a business owner. This is business. This isn't a charity. This is people trying to engage in economic activity, selling a product or a service for a profit. It's called capitalism. And the government gets involved and says you have to pay somebody a minimum wage. The whole thing it has nothing to do with freedom and voluntary cooperation. It's all forced cooperation. Yes, I have been an advocate against the minimum wage, period. No minimum wage for a very long time. Because the market bears out what somebody's willing to pay for a service. People don't get that. They want you to think, they want you to assume that here's the thing, there are examples in history of robber barons and really, men of no character at the top that treat their employees terribly. There are those examples throughout history. But I think most small business owners want to be able to run their business, want to be able to offer good jobs to the employees so that they can offer their service or product and turn a profit. I think most employees want to do that. And if you treat your employees badly, you're not going to have a business.
Okay, well, when you have a business, in general, this can be a corporation, a small little mom and pop shop. If there's a business that is treating their workers unfairly, in this country at least, and it gets out, you can guarantee
with
that
social media now.
Yeah, you can guarantee
terrible.
that business will not last won't last much longer.
That's right. And that's a whole nother conversation.
And but that's another way of the market taking care of itself.
I agree. Popular opinion. Yes, absolutely. All right, we're going to take a break. This segment was brought to you by Conduit for Commerce. They're putting Arkansas small business first. Check them out, conduitforcommerce.org. And, folks, we've got to vote down this minimum wage increase. You got to tell your neighbors, everybody in your sphere of influence, this is bad for business, bad for jobs, bad for Arkansas. I wonder if people will come out, the establishment, the people in positions of power in the establishment here in this state, they always try to hack, some ballot initiative and tell us that if we pass this, rainbows will be in the sky every day and we'll have all these jobs. But I wonder if they'll, with the same amount of vigor, campaign against raising the minimum wage. It doesn't need to happen. It's a terrible idea. Arkansas is already a poor state. We have poor people, socioeconomically disadvantaged people in this state, and I believe it's because our government is so big. Doing this minimum wage, raising it, is only going to hurt small business. It's going to mean less jobs, meaning less opportunity, meaning you're going to have more people dependent on the government who are going to stay socioeconomically disadvantaged. And that's not good. That's not good. We need more jobs. We need people to become rich. That's what we need. We need them to work. We need them to create something for themselves. And the minimum wage goes against that, especially increasing it to $11 an hour. We got to take a break. Back in a moment.
If you believe the Second Amendment protects your right to defend your home with a firearm, where do you turn if the government confiscates your gun? To the courthouse. The Founding Fathers created your Seventh Amendment right to a civil jury to protect your freedoms. The courthouse is where you fight the overreaching hand of government, and the Brad Hendricks Law Firm is where the fight starts. Call the Brad Hendricks Law Firm at 501-221-0444. The Brad Hendricks Law Firm in Little Rock, standing ready using the Seventh Amendment to protect your Second Amendment rights.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
Thousands of regulations that he felt would help consumers, and they ended up making it harder for business to expand, and that tended to slow.
It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we had a little clock malfunction just now, so we're going to just kind of wait a second here because we're going to rejoin some of our other programming here in just a second. The phone number, 870-275-9799. That's 870-275-9799 if you want to contribute to the conversation. Also want to remind you to go to the brand new conduitnews.com. That's conduitnews.com, where we have stories up right now, and you can get the program that's streaming on there right now as well. Listen to this. Over on Facebook, one of our listeners, Shelley, talking about the minimum wage. A lot of people talking about restaurants, talking about how the wait staff in corporate settings never get to keep all their tips. I didn't know this. That they have to subsidize the hostess and busboys' wages by tipping them 3% of all that server's food sales. It's automatic. Another way for corporate restaurants to get away with paying their hostesses and busboys below minimum wage, hurts the entire staff and allows for the restaurant to overschedule staff because they can afford to, and results in everyone who works there suffering because there's too many people waiting tables, so smaller sections, and way less money and opportunity for tips. Just something to throw out there. Not everybody realizes any of this. That's interesting, Shelley. I appreciate you bringing that to attention. I had no idea that that was the case. Fascinating. Somebody writes $11 an hour minimum wage. Does that raise welfare to $22 an hour? Ouch. That's a really good point as well. What about this minimum wage situation? Most voters, I got a text here, most voters will not be immediately affected, and when they are, it will be too late. Especially lower-end prices will rise, eating up any benefits gained. That's exactly right. Because, see, if you vote for the minimum wage increase on the ballot this November, it's going to be an incremental increase. So by the time, negative effects happen, it's going to be slow, and a lot of people have a bad long-term memory in politics. They have a pretty good short-term memory. And so they won't realize what actually has happened. They won't connect the dots that, hey, this is bad. Increasing the minimum wage actually hurts the very people it claims to help, which is your minimum wage worker. Phone number is 870-275-9799 if you want to contribute to the program. That's 870-275-9799. This headline over at Conduit for Action I thought was interesting. We're going to get to here in just a minute. Wait for it, Joe. Exercising power without principles. It's a story about Representative John Eubanks and Representative Jeff Wardlaw. We'll have that story for you when we come back from break. Also, we have a carefully crafted language segment coming up in the next hour, as well as term limits advocate Mr. Tim Jacob will be on the program talking about term limits. Quite the controversy has been brewing over social media with people who are against it or for it and that sort of thing. We had Senator Linda Collins Smith on Friday who talked about why she didn't support the term limits bill. She made reasoned arguments. I tend to support it. I think if you're going to give me an option between 16 years and a decade, sure, let them serve a decade and go home. I think that's a good thing. But, you can make reasoned arguments either way. We're going to have Tim Jacob on, and he's obviously for term limits. And so we'll talk to him about it. Also, I want to refer you to this story, conduitnews.com. Casinos, more tax revenue or less. We've got a casino amendment on the ballot. And there's this little headline here. It says, when government controls the numbers. Give that a read, up right now at conduitnews.com. It's the brand new conduitnews.com. Go there right now for your news. Number one source of Arkansas conservative news and politics. Back in just a moment.
The news and
talk of Northeast Arkansas. This is News Talk 101.3 FM and 12:30 AM KBTM, Jonesboro, an EAB radio station.
Economic growth. One thing he did was convince Congress to pass the Dodd-Frank bill. Now, President Obama felt that much of the financial crisis was caused by what he called predatory lending, which means banks made loans to people who really can't afford it. So he passed Dodd-Frank, which eliminated predatory lending, but it also almost eliminated most other lending. Well, if banks are not lending money, monetary policy is not going to be effective. So that tended to slow economic growth. So what happened? President Trump gets into office. The first thing he can do on his own through executive orders would be to reverse a lot of these counterproductive regulations, which he did. Since he did that, the economy has been growing at over a 3% rate. Then he convinced Congress Dodd-Frank was slowing down economic growth and holding the economy back. He got Congress to repeal part of that, went into effect this year. He also said, look, if we really want to get growth increased, let's take a look at what past presidents have done. So he looked at what Reagan did in 1981, 82, and he looked at what Kennedy and Johnson did at 63, 64, and he said, look, in both instances, they reduced taxes for all Americans, all the way up and down, middle class, upper class, everybody. Taxes were reduced, and the economy took off. So he convinced his Congress last November to reduce taxes for everybody. That went into effect in January of this year. By April of this year, the economy was growing at over a 4% rate, and it's my view that the third quarter of this year, the number won't be announced till the end of October, we're probably going to see a 4.5% growth, and it wouldn't surprise me to see a quarter next year where economic growth exceeded even 5%. 1982, when Reagan's tax cut went into effect, in 1984, economic growth for the year was 7.5%. So the growth that we're getting now and the robust economy is all due to President Trump essentially reversing much of what President Obama did, putting government out of the way of business, letting business go in the marketplace and pursue opportunities. That's adding all the growth that we're seeing now and I believe into the future. So it's President Trump who should get complete credit for what's happening today in the economy.
And I agree with that. And we're talking with Dr. Michael Busler, public policy analyst. He is a professor of finance at Stockton University in New Jersey. I agree with what you're saying, and I'm glad you're setting the record straight. We have the media. I think they're seeing this. I think they also see that the average American, I mean, I saw a poll last week, I know from Turning Point USA, Candace Owens, she talked about how black support for Trump has doubled, according to one poll from last year to now. The mainstream media sees this, and they say, oh, we've got to figure out a way to say that, President Obama is responsible for all of this. And, that you're starting to see that. They're trying to promote this idea that this is Obama's economy.
Yeah, and clearly it isn't President Obama's economy. And, the press, I've seen 3 different studies, and they all come about to the same conclusion. More than 90% of what the press writes about President Trump is negative. They've lost a lot of their objectivity. They feel they have a duty to somehow minimize the effects of what President Trump is doing. In fact, they'd like to get him out of office sooner if they could. The mainstream media is supposed to report factually on what's happening without a bias in the reporting. Now, you certainly have your opinions, and on your opinion pages, you're allowed to give what your opinions of what is happening, what your opinions are. But when it comes to reporting the news, it's got to be done on a factual basis. And what is being done is always done on such a slanted basis that it's not really factual news, and it even gets to the point where President Trump says, look, some of the things you're saying just aren't true. And he refers to that as as fake news. And then he uses the term enemy of the people, and everybody was all up in arms about that. We had last Thursday, was it, the 300 editorials saying what President Trump...
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
Yeah, so over at conduitnews.com, our interview from yesterday with Michael Busler is up. If you guys want to check that out at conduitnews.com, that was a fantastic interview. He is a professor of finance at Stockton University. He was on, and can't wait to have him on again. He did a great job really just illustrating how Donald Trump's policies have been successful and how really the reason the economy is doing so well is because President Trump has tried to undo and has successfully undone a lot of the regulations and taxes that President Obama put on the American people. It's a great interview, and it's up right now at conduitnews.com. When you, I guess, at the bottom of the program, Mr. Tim Jacob will be on, so we're excited about that. Going to talk about term limits and his support of term limits. What I was going to say is when you go to conduitnews.com, not only do you have these stories that you can peruse, but right there at the bottom of that, or maybe in the middle of the page there, you have all of these interviews that we cut up. So if you miss something on the program, be sure to go to Conduit News to catch up on certain segments and things like that. Okay, let's start with this interesting development. So while some state legislators are passionately pleading with voters not to pass Issue 3, this is the term limits, some of their colleagues are undermining the case. So we do have a lot, this is true, we do have a lot of legislators, it seems, who are saying, listen, we don't think 10 years is long enough, it's going to empower bureaucrats and everything else. Over at conduitfraction.org, they've got this piece saying that State Representative John Eubanks, a Republican from Paris, and Representative Jeff Wardlaw, who's sort of a Republican. Well, I mean, he was a Democrat, but he changed over to be a Republican so that he could be the chairman of the Public Health Committee in the House. They are actually making arguments for stronger term limits, according to this piece. The University of Arkansas didn't hire the person State Representative John Eubanks wanted, so he got Representative Jeff Wardlaw to use his status as a member of the Legislative Committee reviewing state agency contracts to hold up 20 projects of the University of Arkansas. The Democrat Gazette reported after the University of Arkansas Fayetteville didn't hire his favorite candidate for a job, a state lawmaker secured a legislative panel's delay in considering 20 proposed contracts and construction projects at colleges in the University of Arkansas system. In recent interviews, State Representative John Eubanks said he asked the Legislative Council's Review Subcommittee co-chairman, Jeff Wardlaw, to have the committee hold onto the proposals during the panel's July 18th meeting because he wanted to express his concerns about the direction of the Arkansas Leadership Academy to the University of Arkansas System Vice President of University Relations, Melissa Rust. The academy is on the U of A campus in Fayetteville. Interesting situation here. The headline, Exercising Power Without Principles, Representative John Eubanks and Jeff Wardlaw. Yeah, I mean, it's stuff like this that's interesting. You want your favorite candidate for a job. It doesn't happen. You don't get it, and so, you use power to hold things up, hold contracts up. I think this is, this is just the way things go. This is the way things go. I was texting with a friend yesterday about this story, and what they kept saying, well, Jeff Wardlaw, he's really just a Democrat anyway, because he was a Democrat and now he's a Republican. Again, this really sparked more of a memory in my mind that had to do with the fact that I had, sometimes it slips your mind that Representative Jeff Wardlaw was a Democrat, and he switched to being a Republican so he could be the chairman of the Public Health Committee, because you got to have somebody who's going to, keep the status quo as the chairman of powerful health committees like that. Don't you know? In other news, we have the red flag situation. This has been something that is gaining steam, from what I can tell, on social media. Tomorrow on the program, we're going to interview Mr. Tim Loggins from the Patriots of X746. We're going to talk a little bit more about the red flag laws. This headline here, Arkansas governor from last week, open to red flag law on guns. Seizures in threatening situations would need to adhere to due process. I want you to understand something here with these red flag laws. What we're talking about is the ability to take somebody's weapons from them without being convicted of something. We're talking about seizing your property, taking away your human right to self-defense based on an accusation. And they can claim, well, there would need to be due process. They can claim that all they want. But here's the thing. You're going to have, the end result is your weapons will be taken from you if you were reported and you go through their due process without being charged, it's based on you, maybe they think you're going to commit a future crime. It's like Minority Report, but without the, what do they call those people in the tubs? Cognitives, or what do they call them? Anyway, precogs or something. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, it's going to be like that. And I know people may get on board, but I want you to understand something. You shouldn't, if you're a Second Amendment supporter, you shouldn't want anything to do with the government getting involved here, because it's going to be a mess. I don't care if they say due process or not. They are trying to push red flag laws all over the nation. These gun control mongers, these fear mongers, they want to push these red flag laws in states all across the country. I was told that over in Texas, they just had to defeat something like this notion. And now all of a sudden it's popping up here. This isn't a coincidence. This is a coordinated effort. And Governor Asa Hutchinson last week, essentially, as he was spurned by the fear-mongering piece in the Gazette that talked about how Arkansas is one of the top states in the nation when it comes to gun violence, and yet they didn't even mention Illinois, and yet they have a liberal utopia when it comes to gun control up there, and people in Chicago are dying like flies. They don't even mention that, which was interesting. Very interesting omission. If you would have mentioned it, if you had mentioned it, it might have kind of hurt your argument a little bit, don't you think? These are all trial balloons trying to figure, well, how are we going to do this? So you've got somebody that, you want to do your red flag law? Okay, well, we've got to figure out how are we going to maneuver. I saw somebody commenting on a thread that talked about how Jan Morgan supporters were vilified by claiming that Governor Asa Hutchinson was not for the Second Amendment, the way he claimed to be for the Second Amendment. Remember what the governor said? It is what it says, I believe in the Second Amendment. It is what it says it is. You know, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And people on the governor's side said, I can't believe you would question the governor's support for the Second Amendment. I can't believe that you would dissect what he did with the enhanced carry law. I can't believe he's for the Second Amendment. The NRA supports him and blah, 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 blah. And now that we're out of the primary season, he comes out in support, or he comes out open to having the legislature debate red flag laws. It's unbelievable. I bet the piece of legislation has already been written. I bet it's already been written. This is a big deal. And it needs to be, given even more attention here, because from what I can tell, and I'm going to give you more of the information tomorrow on the show when we have Tim Loggins on, but there are people seem to be putting out their conditions for how they would support. Well, if there is a red flag law, just like the governor, well, it'd have to have due process. Well, if there is a red flag law, you would have to have these other things. But I'm open to it. Is what it seems to be, what seems to be happening out there. Let me read you the governor's full statement here. It has to be accompanied by due process. It has to be, because you're dealing with constitutional rights and liberties. It's fair to look at it. That could be a debate in the next session of the legislature. Joe, will you cue up, please? I'm going to need to hear this before. What? Go ahead and play. Go ahead.
I want to refer everybody back to my remarks, because that's the key language that was carefully crafted.
Okay, so in light of carefully crafted language, it has to be accompanied by due process. It has to be, because you're dealing with constitutional rights and liberties. Okay, so he said the phrase constitutional rights and liberties. That means he understands them and wants to protect them. Right? Well, he said it, so that must mean he knows about constitutional rights and liberties, because he used the phrase constitutional rights and liberties. It has to be accompanied by due process. It's fair to look at it. That could be a debate in the next session of the legislature. But it has to be due process. You know what that avoids? You can talk about, well, we're dealing with constitutional rights and liberties, and you can still vote to take them away. I mean, you can preface the beginning of your argument with, well, we're dealing with constitutional rights and liberties, and you can end the sentence by saying, and we need to take them away in these instances, without being convicted of a crime, without being found guilty in a court. That's your due process. I mean, in all seriousness, this is carefully crafted language in its highest form here. I want you to understand that, because what we're talking about with red flag laws is taking away your right when you haven't been convicted in a court. You're going to have due process of suspicion, but you're not actually going to be found guilty of breaking the law. You're just going to be found out to be, suspicious or... And if you don't think the government will abuse this, if you don't think there will be people who will be victims, who will wrongly have their rights taken away, then you don't have the healthy American skepticism of those in power that I do. I have a very healthy American attitude that many of you do about people in positions of power. This is certainly carefully crafted language at its highest. Let me hear. Can we hear it again? Joe, can we hear the clip again? I'm sorry, Joe just got a phone.
I want to refer everybody back to my remarks, because that's the key language that was carefully crafted.
Yeah. It has to be accompanied by due process. It has to be, because you're dealing with constitutional rights and liberties. Folks, this is the same governor who said that you have a Second Amendment privilege multiple times. The same governor who said that. So, I don't know. I think it's interesting. The person on Facebook that I saw that wrote, Jan Morgan supporters were vilified for questioning the governor's commitment to the Second Amendment. I know there are supporters out there of the governor, like diehard supporters, because, I don't know, you really like the red T-shirt. As long as they got a red T-shirt on, it really doesn't matter what they do. I understand that. But even you guys, right? Isn't that strange that he comes out in support of this? You and I both know he would have never done this if the primary were still going on, right? You and I both know that, right? I mean, it's kind of shameless when you think about it. I mean, it is. Well, I tell you what it is. It's a political strategy that used to work really well before the age of President Donald Trump. That's what I think. Because this type of stuff is just so blatantly offensive, because it assumes that the people are morons. And we're not. We're aware of what's going on. We're watching. We have a memory. We're going to take a break, and we're going to be back here in just a minute. Coming up at the bottom of this hour, we'll be talking with Mr. Tim Jacob, who is a term limits advocate, to say the least. Back in just a moment.
Is doing is wrong. The mainstream media has got to start reporting things factually. If they're providing inaccurate information to the voters and the voters are making decisions based on inaccurate information, you end up causing chaos with democracy. That's what the Russians are trying to do. The Russians are trying to put out inaccurate information so people will make bad, uninformed decisions. The media is almost doing the same thing that the Russians are doing by providing inaccurate information to the readers.
Yeah, it's kind of, I've described it before. There's so many people that consume the mainstream media. They think that they're being told the truth. And, when you think that you're free and you think that you're, being told the truth, that's extremely powerful, and that's better.
Yeah.
That's way better than an outright totalitarian state. You know what I'm saying? Where you have the
money, power, prestige, essence, available now from aristocrats serving Arkansas. From Zenata Rhino Collection, the fragrance of backroom deals, nepotism, the aroma of higher taxes, subliminal deception, deep state, ace. Made right here in Arkansas by a taxpayer-funded Chinese factory. Every bottle carefully crafted for you. Gender neutral. Nothing says aristocrat like Essence of Bureaucrat. Essence of Bureaucrat by Asa.
Available now in the Marble Palace gift shop.
Paul Harrell parody. Determined to drain the swamp in Little Rock, it's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Real quick, follow-up on this. The Texas Tribune with a headline here, July 27th, prospects for red flag gun law in Texas plummet as Governor Greg Abbott sees coalescence against it. Governor Greg Abbott said Friday he sees a coalescence against the idea of having so-called red flag laws in Texas, further dooming the proposal's chances in the legislature. Abbott asked lawmakers to consider the idea as part of a school safety plan he released earlier this year after the deadly Santa Fe high school shooting. So there was a terrible, obviously, tragedy with the Santa Fe high school shooting. And the response, unfortunately, from Greg Abbott and other people who want gun control is, okay, we need to have these red flag laws and everything else. There's just one problem. The legislature of Texas, that's closer to the people, they seem to be saying this is not a good idea. Now, these are going to continue to be pushed all over the nation. And matter of fact, they might, I have an article here that the lieutenant governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, is against the red flag laws. My point is, this is happening everywhere. They're trying to push this idea, and what they're ignoring is the fact that when it's all said and done, you can use the word due process all you want. Well, as long as there's due process, but you're going to have people with their Second Amendment rights taken away from them when they haven't been found guilty. It's going to be, it sets a really, really terrible precedent. It really does. And again, we don't treat anything. Would you treat the First Amendment this way? Well, we need red flag laws when it comes to your First Amendment. You're just kind of crazy, and we don't know if we need you saying anything on the sidewalk. So we're gonna have a due process, but eventually we're going to silence you at the end of this, and we're going to forbid you from speaking. I mean, it's crazy, but we treat the Second Amendment differently than all other amendments. Yeah, no more words for you. Exactly. Hey, folks, the Chamber of Commerce, Arkansas Chamber of Commerce, they always stand for, common sense values and things like that. Yeah. The head of the Chamber of Commerce has formed a group to oppose strengthening Arkansas term limits. This is up at conduitnews.com. The battle over Arkansas term limits is heating up quickly, according to filings with the Arkansas Ethics Commission. Arkansas Chamber of Commerce CEO Randy Zook has formed a ballot committee to oppose Issue 3 of 2018. This was first reported by Michael Wickline of the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. Issue 3 of 2018 is a proposed constitutional amendment that would strengthen Arkansas term limits. Under the initiative, a representative may serve 3 two-year terms, and a senator may serve 2 four-year terms. It would cap legislative service at a total of 10 years. Named the Arkansans for Common Sense Term Limits, their state purpose is advocate for the disqualification or defeat of state legislative term limits initiative. Now, so this is Randy Zook, the Chamber of Commerce, setting this organization up. Anytime we mention Randy Zook's name, we like to remind you that he was on the Common Core Task Force, and he spoke out, and he said this one time. Listen.
Because I've been up here in the legislature when folks were rattling around and screaming bloody murder, and I can't help my kid with their homework. Well, they shouldn't be helping their kid with the homework in the first place. That's a teacher's job. That's my opinion. Well, they shouldn't be helping their kid with the homework in the first place. That's a teacher's job.
You find that a little bit extreme, maybe outside the norm of thought. Popular thought. That's Randy Zook, everybody, the head of the Arkansas Chamber of Commerce. We've got to take a break. And when we come back, we'll be talking with Mr. Tim Jacob about term limits. Don't go anywhere. illusion of objectivity and the illusion of choice. And I would just say that, the facts that you went through, I mean, you talked and, quite eloquently about all of the regulations that Obama put in, the taxes that Obama put in. Can you imagine if that made a report on CNN where it would never happen, where you would say, well, why does Trump? Well, this is what Trump did. He cut taxes and he rolled back everything Obama had done. I mean, that's the facts. I mean, you could argue cause and effect, but the facts are he did these things that were supposed to help the economy, and we now have positive economic results. Make your own conclusions. Draw your own conclusions, America. But this is what happened. They would never do that. They have to editorialize.
That's exactly right. And, a lot of the anger, I think, that's being felt in America today is a result of this slow growth economy. Again, if you look back in history, it goes back even a little further than Obama. The U.S. hasn't had economic growth of at least 3% since 2005. We haven't had economic growth of 4% since the year 2000. That's the longest period, in my view, of economic stagnation in the U.S. history. President Trump is reversing this. Now, as a result of that bad economy for so long, you get a lot of frustrated Americans. For instance, college graduates for the last 10 years, and I've seen it with my students, over the last 10 years, they struggle to get one good job offer when they graduate. Many times, college graduates have taken jobs for which they're overqualified simply because there's a no-growth economy and there aren't good jobs available. So they take jobs for which they're overqualified. You don't need the college degree necessarily. So they get very frustrated with that, especially when they're carrying a lot of debt. As a result of the college grads taking those jobs, then the people without college degrees, they don't have any opportunity at all. They drop out of the labor force, become what we call discouraged workers, probably 5 or 6 million of those, and that leads to a lot of frustration, and people start blaming each other for their bad plight. Once the growth gets going as it is today, and we're already starting to see it, a lot of underemployed college graduates are now finding jobs that take advantage of their degree. That opens up jobs for people who have less than a college degree, and starting in June, those people started flocking back into the labor force, so the participation rate is starting to go up. I think that's going to get rid of a lot of the anger in America.
Bringing you your daily dose of truth. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, welcome back. This is interesting. I'm liking the Facebook comments. I appreciate it. Folks, I want to remind you to go to the brand new conduitnews.com. You can get this broadcast. We're broadcasting live there now. You can also get news, events, interview clips, things like that. You can also support us on Patreon for extra content, that sort of thing. Okay, so let's welcome to the program. We've got Mr. Tim Jacob on the phone. Tim, it's always great to have you on, sir. You're a term limits advocate. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for allowing me to be on this morning.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure. Listen, I think term limits is a good idea. I think taking it from 16 down to 10 is a good idea. I know there are other people that disagree. They can make arguments to the contrary, and, I respect those people, and I can respectfully disagree with them and agree to disagree and hopefully work together on other issues. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on this. There does seem to be some legislators out there who are, coming out and saying, listen, we think this is a terrible idea.
Well, I think it's a great thing, and I'm very grateful that we're having this debate this time, because in 2014, when the legislature put through that fraudulent amendment and deceptive amendment, we did not have that debate. So I'm glad that after a 3-year bout of laryngitis that some of them have gotten their voice back. And I think it's healthy when we debate this statewide. Good people can disagree about this, but everyone can agree that deception does not work in Arkansas and has no place in Arkansas politics. And that's exactly what the legislature and the lobbyists did in 2014.
And that is a great point, and I feel like that to me is the one reason, is probably my biggest motivator to vote for this. Aside from the fact at the end of the day, it's like, hey, do you think 16 years is good, or do you think a decade is good? And I'm like, okay, a decade's fine. Let's, you go past a decade, it really can become a career, and not for career politicians. But the main thing here, and I've been trying to talk about this a little bit, is that what John Woods did, and convicted felon John Woods, and now really the rest of the General Assembly too, and I know there were people that did speak out against it at the time, but like you said, there wasn't this kind of debate that we're having right now. Now we're having a much broader debate with more people involved. Our own government lied to the people intentionally. They intentionally. We can blame most of it on John Woods, but the fact is the rest of the General Assembly voted for it. They voted for the title, and it went there. It was deceptive, and our own government lied to us. And now the people are taking the pendulum, and we're attempting to swing it back. And I don't think anybody should be surprised by that. I think that's a healthy thing.
I tend to agree with you. I think it's very healthy, and let's be sure to point out that senators can now stay 22 years, depending on how those 2-year terms fall. 22 years is not a term limit. That's a limit that anybody who doesn't believe in term limits could live with. So it's gone from 22, and here is the question Arkansas voters have to ask themselves. Do we want to live by an amendment written in silence by a convicted felon who's defrauded the state of Arkansas, or are we going to have an amendment written by the people that, in most part, has already won 2 landslide elections?
Mm-hmm.
We've got to decide whether the legislature is going to set their own terms or the people are going to have to say so. The biggest problem with this issue is that we've had 2 statewide landslide elections, and the so-called representatives of the people do not represent the people. They have not accepted the will of the people. They have not accepted the vote. They haven't respected voters, and they haven't respected the vote. And we have to get back to that situation here.
One of the, negative aspects of this, according to the opponents of this term limits initiative that's on the ballot, is that bureaucrats will be empowered, and that bureaucrats love the idea of term limits because they are able to trick and dupe ignorant legislators who don't have a grasp of how things work when they first get down there. Can you respond to that criticism?
Nothing could be further from the truth. No bureaucratic organization has ever supported strict term limits. In fact, they've worked, if you look at the 2004 campaign that we ran statewide, that 75 out of 75 counties said no to the legislature. Where did the bureaucratic organizations fall in that funding? They fell on the side of the legislators. Same thing goes with lobbyists. I hear lobbyists are going to gain power and they're going to have control over freshmen. Well, lobbyists don't support these term limits. In fact, one of the bigger lobbyists is now heading the opposition against this term limit bill. It's a fallacy to think that bureaucrats or lobbyists ever support strict term limits. They gain their power by attaching themselves to long-term incumbents. If we want a citizen legislature, not career politicians, we need to vote for issue 3.
Let me ask you this, because you just said something that I've never actually thought about before. You're saying, you said lobbyists, but let's talk about the bureaucrats. You think that's true with bureaucrats,
Sure.
that bureaucrats gain their power by forging relationships with those in power, similar to lobbyists?
Of course I do, yeah.
Wow.
And one of the proof's in the pudding. Never has any bureaucratic organization ever been on the side of strict term limits. Look at the 2004 campaign. Look where the state employees union came down.
Wow. Yeah,
I
didn't know that.
If they support us, why would they always give money to our opposition? And legislators know this. They might say that lobbyists and bureaucrats have a different job, and they're both needed. but they don't need to be kingmakers. They need to give information to legislators so legislators can make a good decision when representing their constituents. But they don't need to be kingmakers, and they don't need to ensure a political career. Term limits is a great, healthy, reasonable way to bring legislators back to a more representative nature. We want them to represent the people in their district, not lobbyists and not bureaucrats.
We're talking with Tim Jacob. He's a term limits advocate. He's instrumental in getting this thing on the ballot. That is issue 3. I think it's interesting that it's issue 3 on the ballot, and John Woods, lied to the people with his own issue 3. So that's fascinating. In 10 years, I feel like is a long enough time, and I know I'm not a legislator, and that's one of the criticisms. Well, you don't know, you haven't been down there. I will say what has been interesting about the debate that's being had is when the other side comes and they say that the argument of 10 years isn't long enough to get a handle on things. Is that not a rebuke of just how dysfunctional the situation is and how our representatives really aren't representing us? If the government is so bad and so big that over a 10-year period you can't get anything done, you can't reform, you can't do what the people sent you down there to do.
Well, and I think a lot of progress happens in your freshman term, just because then you're coming with fresh ideas. You're representing your constituents more at that time. The folks that say 10 years isn't long enough, do they believe in the presidential term limit? Certainly the president has more to learn. Certainly the president has more responsibilities, and we're limiting the president to 8 years. Mm-hmm. Every statewide office except a legislator has a lower limit. It's 8 years for auditor, for lieutenant governor, for governor. And legislators under this amendment will get 10 years. I would say that they need to hit the ground running, do the best they can, but allow the voters to decide how long the term limit is. That shouldn't be done with lobbyists and legislators in a closed-door meeting. That shouldn't be done with a campaign of silence where the voters aren't even informed that it's on the ballot. What happened in 2014 cannot stand. We're going to have a choice between an amendment that was written by a convicted felon or an amendment that the voters, in most part, have already approved in 2 landslide elections. That's the choice in November.
Yeah, and you know what? When you put it in those terms, I mean, how do you not vote for this thing? And look, I think this thing is going to pass because of what the people have done in the past, because of the will of the voters. It's an honest ballot title. It says what it is. It says what it's going to do. It has the word term limit in the ballot title, which the other ones you had to read in it was an ethics amendment and that sort of thing. It was extremely deceptive. Now I do want to talk about the opposition to this, Tim, because you do have the Chamber of Commerce. We were just talking about this. The Chamber of Commerce CEO Randy Zook has formed a ballot committee to oppose issue 3. Do you think there's going to be a lawsuit? I mean, it says right here that the purpose is to advocate for the disqualification or defeat. Do you think they're going to use the courts to try to disqualify the term limits amendment?
Of course they will, because any group of folks that is deceptive enough to put this on the ballot without a debate, with campaign of silence, does not want this to go to the Arkansas voters. So I predict that they will try to sue to take this away from the voters so that the voters cannot make a decision on this. This whole issue has been a deception on the part of the legislature, on the part of the lobbyists, and we need to say no to it. But we are going to have to fight this in court because they cannot stand for this to get to the ballot.
I mean, it's gonna severely, I think, curtail, the power structure down there. It's going to change things in a big way, and they certainly don't want that. I'm curious as to what their arguments are going to be, though, because it's not as if there are multiple issues. It's in one ballot, that could get it or in one initiative that could get it disqualified, but that's not here. It's very simple. I'm just curious what they may do to get this thing, up to the Supreme Court or something like that. And I'm like you. We always hear when we always hear from legislators who want to raise taxes, but they don't want to go on record for raising taxes. They'll say, well, I didn't vote to raise taxes. I just voted to put it on the ballot to let the people decide. The people need to decide this. It's the people. Well, you know what? That's the same thing here, right? Let's use that same argument. Let the people decide. What do you want? You want 16 years or possibly 22 years if you get, play your cards right, or do you want the 10-year term limits? Go ahead, Tim.
Well, I just think that's right, and I think the people need to decide. We wouldn't be here at this point today if they had been honest with their ballot title and let the people decide in 2014. They are the ones that decided to hide this legislation on page 16 of an unrelated amendment. In the same amendment, they also tripled their pay. They didn't want voters to have a decision on that either because they did not announce that. They did not publicize it. This has been a travesty of legislation, and it's time that we look to the voters to make this decision and not to the legislators. And it's interesting that they will always, and I've heard this constantly, well, lobbyists are going to be empowered. Well, does the Chamber of Commerce not know that? Because the Chamber of Commerce is our opposition. Every lobbyist will be our opposition here. I wish they'd stop saying something that they know is false. Lobbyists hate term limits. That's the truth.
Yeah, they have to. If you got a new legislator, you have to reforge that relationship. I imagine that's more expensive on the front end.
Well, it is, and they do have to work harder. They have to explain their issues to legislators, and they have to try to convince them on the merits of their issue. They cannot promise a political career, and that takes an arrow out of the quiver of lobbyists.
Wow. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
It's really important that we determine who is going to make the rules of term limits in the state of Arkansas. Are we going to let the voters do it, or are we going to let lobbyists and legislators do it?
Tim,
that's our choice in November. And I encourage everyone to stand up for our rights. The people rule. That's the motto of our state. Let's make sure that the people rule in November and not legislators and lobbyists with a campaign of silence and deception. It's very important that we make this stand and give a loud voice to term limits in our state.
Tim Jacob, I want you to go ahead and give the website if people want more information, want to support you guys. I mean, I understand if there's going to be a lawsuit, which we probably think there is, that's going to cost money to defend, correct?
That is true, and the powerful are going to have the deep pockets. It's the people versus the powerful on this issue, but our website is arkansastermlimits.org. I encourage you to go to it, get some information from it. Please help fund us. We need that funding desperately. We are going up against the most powerful people in our state. We're going up against the most powerful legislators in our state. This is the voice of the people, and I'd like to thank 135,000 Arkansans that signed this petition, the hundreds and hundreds of people that worked all around our state to do this, not for their own power, not to ingratiate themselves with anyone, but just because they knew what was right and they knew that the people deserve a voice on this issue.
Tim Jacob, it's always great to have you on, sir. We appreciate it. You have a great day.
Hey, thanks, Paul.
All righty, folks, ArkansasTermLimits.com. We got to take a break. Back in just a moment.
If you believe the Second Amendment protects your right to defend your home with a firearm, where do you turn if the government confiscates your gun? To the courthouse. The Founding Fathers created your Seventh Amendment right to a civil jury to protect your freedoms. The courthouse is where you fight the overreaching hand of government. And the Brad Hendricks Law Firm is where the fight starts. Call the Brad Hendricks Law Firm at 501-221-0444. The Brad Hendricks Law Firm in Little Rock, standing ready using the Seventh Amendment to protect your Second Amendment rights.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world.
These delayed roller lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
We can start working together rather than fighting each other all the time.
We're talking with Dr. Michael Bussler, public policy analyst, professor at Stockton University, and he knows what he's talking about, clearly, folks. But, Dr. Bussler, I'm curious, you did mention all the stuff that Trump has done in terms of, rolling back regulations and things like this. But what is your opinion on the tariff situation? And now we have China coming back to the table, and they're saying we will negotiate now because, our economy's not doing so hot now. I mean, that also, I think, has a lot to do with maybe some confidence. I mean, you have at least Trump saying, I know there's some debate as to how effective it is. It seems pretty effective to me, but you have a psychological confidence here where the president's going to bat for the middle class and the American worker versus President Obama that told small business owners they didn't build their business and demonized millions.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is building a liberty machine. Find out more at conduitnews.com.
So I got that website wrong at the end. It's actually ArkansasTermLimits.org. ArkansasTermLimits.org, not ArkansasTermLimits.com. So anyway, I just want to make sure I correct the record on that. There was an interesting story that came up in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, and it was talking about the hearing yesterday that had to do with the Medicaid subcommittee. So they had Cindy Gillespie did show up. She didn't show up in their July meeting, okay? But she did show up with the meeting yesterday. And Andy Davis has this story about how they're looking, and hopefully they're going to make changes to some of the discrepancies. The state may owe the federal government like 100. Is it 26 million or 126 million? Let me pull this story up because I had it here just a second ago, but you have it right there. Go ahead and show that to the listeners while I'm trying to find it here. Agency to add unit for auditors. So we have to have more government. We have to have more government to manage the growth in government. That's what it seems like to me. So Andy Davis, the State Department of Human Services will create a new unit to work with outside auditors and address any problems they discover, according to Cindy Gillespie. That's what she told lawmakers. Now, Senator Linda Collins Smith here has a quote is quoted by Andy Davis, where she said to Cindy Gillespie, the overpaid head of DHS, "If you come to these meetings, I think you can learn a lot from them." That's fantastic. Way to go, Senator Linda Collins Smith. At a meeting of the Legislative Joint Audit Committee's Medicaid Subcommittee, Human Services Director Cindy Gillespie apologized for not attending the panel's last meeting, in which other department officials briefed lawmakers on the department's response to an audit that flagged reporting errors and other discrepancies related to $126 million in expenses. Cindy Gillespie says, "We are taking this extremely seriously. We have a lot of work ahead." So how did this happen? Well, the audit almost found, before we get to that, the audit also found almost $28 million that the state could owe the federal government because of basically dropping the ball, not filling out the right paperwork, not doing your jobs. But Gillespie said the amount owed, quote, will come substantially down. There's not a budget problem. We don't anticipate a budget issue around it, she said. There's nothing to see here. And listen to this. This is probably the biggest revelation. And here's the headline. I mean, Andy Davis with the Gazette, I'm glad he wrote this story. I'm glad he's covering this story, okay? I'm glad he was at the Medicaid subcommittee. I'm glad that was happening, right? But I wish the headline had something to do with the fact that Cindy Gillespie, according to this report, didn't realize until she was briefed on the audit findings several months ago that the department had not been correcting the problems. Okay? She has been, she's been, around since 2016? She took office, or she was given her job after she comes from the international law firm Denton's. She comes to Arkansas on assignment. She takes this job in 2016, and she didn't realize until several months ago that the department hadn't been correcting problems that they were finding. Well, what do you do with those problems? Quote, "I had almost nothing to say during the meeting when she learned about the findings," meaning when she learned that they weren't correcting the problems, the discrepancies they were finding, they weren't correcting them. She's quoted as saying, "I had almost nothing to say. I was livid." The headline here should read, quote, "I had almost nothing to say." That's or DHS director, quote, "had almost nothing to say upon discovering the agency she heads is not doing their job." I mean, that's your headline. Well, as a taxpayer, it's very frustrating to you. I mean, what about you guys? Is it frustrating to you guys as taxpayers that this stuff's going on? Again, what does the government have to do more to confirm your worldview as a conservative? And that's how I feel personally. What does the government have to do more to confirm my personal worldview as a limited government conservative? So what do? Well, we have to have a new unit. We have to have a new unit to monitor this stuff. We have more responsibility to manage this big government. Basically, it's like an Escalade limo. That's what it is. She said she also instructed her staff to be more helpful in providing information to legislative auditors. I do hope they're beginning to see a change in the way DHS is responding to their audits, and change in the way DHS is seeking to provide them with information they need. Said very bluntly, if they're not seeing the change, it's something I need to know, because I'm trying to push it as hard as I can, and I know that my senior management is trying to push it as hard as they can. Cindy Gillespie, director of DHS, here from the international law firm called Denton's. Look it up. Denton's, DENTONS. We will see you tomorrow. Got a great show lined up for you tomorrow. Arkansas, be safe.